Hey Homeworthy, I'm Alex. Welcome to my Upper Side apartment. Come on in.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story. If you're looking to make your own space more homeworthy, we've teamed up with Cherish, our go-to online destination for chic, one-of-a-kind finds, sourced from the world's most wonderful vendors.
Mercury drops are from an artist I found on Cherish.
Whether we're after a bold statement piece or the perfect finishing touch, Cherish has extraordinary items that leave a lasting impression.
This table I bought on Cherish from Berlin, and it has a little bit of it's a tray, and it is mid-century, and it's one of my favorite pieces.
It's where we find iconic looks to set homes apart.
I think many dealers would agree that Cherish is the absolute best.
So to support Homeworthy and discover amazing items from Cherish, scan the QR code or click on the link below to start shopping.
I'm Alex Wilson. I'm an interior decorator in New York City, and we're at my apartment on the Upper East Side. My interior design style is, I would say, rooted in tradition and, neoclassical, background. But I think definitely I am a big fan of color. I'm a big fan of pattern. I love to use them in all my projects, but judiciously, I'm a big fan of green, if you can't tell. I love the, mixing of old pieces, new pieces, antiques, mid-century, even the sofas from CB2. So it's all about how you use things and, the context in which you use them. So someone recently said to me that they thought that my apartment was a maximalist, minimalist apartment, and I would never have thought of that myself, but I kind of thought that it was an interesting way to look at it. We are in the foyer of my apartment, which is small but mighty. I started with this wall fabric from Claire Louise Frost, which I had used on a project, but had always been obsessed with and had wanted to use it in another application. And it felt like the right time to go for it. And I also got the opportunity to use one of my favorite colors, which is aubergine, which if you look in the fabric, there's a small stripe that introduces that color. So I use that on the doors, baseboard, casing, crown, which is Pharaoh and Ball brinjal. And what I really like about decorating, or one thing I always try to do in a project, is have there be a thread that carries you through every room of the house. So while all the rooms might be different, there's something consistent throughout that sort of connects the dots as you go through that makes it feel cohesive and not a little bit scattered. This mirror is from Lulu in Georgia, I believe, and I thought it was a nice counterpoint towards the more not traditional fabric on the walls, but neoclassical with the Greek tea, and it felt sort of like a nice juxtaposition with that element. And then the lantern is from Hector Finch and is sort of a, streamlined modern version of a traditional classic lantern. These paintings, there used to be a thrift over on the west side at one of the piers. It was called like Big Thrift or Big, Vintage or something like that. And I found those there, and they are old. They are English country seats, and we have Castle Cool, Nether Hall, and Oxley Manor. I would say be confident in what you like. What you like is what you like. And, I think having confidence in what interests you and appeals to you is, more important than, thinking about a trend or what's popular. Now we're in the living room of my apartment, which, you know, mostly serves as a living room, but also doubles down as more of the foyer space because the actual foyer is so small, you can't really have a table. So this is where I have sort of the entry console where you drop your keys, your mail, and then also the dining table, which is mostly a console, but that has leaves that fold out when you have people over and you want to have a dinner party. The console was found by Ashley Whitaker, and she brought it up to our old office. And when I was decorating the apartment, I brought it over here, and it was the perfect, thing that I needed because it's not too deep. It's a true console in that it only has 2 legs. A console table has 4 legs, but a console has 2. And yeah, it's great. And it's sort of carries on the neoclassical motif with the Greek key from the Foyer wall fabric, which was, inadvertent, but. And then I have got this photograph by Jason Frank Rothenberg, which is from Sears Payton Gallery down on 11th Avenue. And they are one of my favorite galleries in New York. They represent a lot of artists that, do different mediums. And I was always very enamored by this piece because it's very pretty, but it's also a little bit ugly. It's a little bit moody. It sort of brings you in and, it's inviting, but also a little bit scary. The shells are cool, but it's great. So I recently got this from them, and it's one of my favorite things in the apartment. This is you might notice as we go through, I have a collection of camels. My dad and I both are collectors of camel things, whether it's statues, sculptures, whatever. So this is a leather Moroccan camel. And then this is a very neat, ashtray cashpo catch-all from a friend of mine, Julia Ferentinos, who has a company called Jujuvera Vintage, and it is a reinterpretation of the Roman floor tiles that had trash as you would have thrown it out, which was sort of an indication of your wealth back in the Roman days. So she reinvented that as a brass moment, which is very, very pretty, which I love. I've got a lot of books, and my brother actually gave me these, which is the Treasury of American Design, and then the Dictionary of English Furniture came from my aunt, who was a very important figure in my life and was also a decorator. Now we are at my fireplace, which is a very important part of the room because, not many apartments in New York have a working fireplace. And initially all of the trim was white, and the sort of at the time it seemed very ugly, this brown, not even brown, it's like sort of terracotta red, but is it a marble, is it a granite? Unclear. It was very, very ugly, and painting it green unintentionally made the marble stand out less and sort of appear less unattractive, which I love. And then I have got a sort of mild, fascination. I'm a big collector of things, boxes, camels, ashtrays, but I also love Egyptian things. So a big fan of Egyptomania. So I've got these bookends that I got from Avery and Dash, which are of Sphinx. And then this is a ink blotter that has got scarabs on it. So it's pretty cool. And then this, interestingly, is a pencil drawing from an architect firm that built my great-grandparents' house in North Carolina. The architecture firm was Myers, Murray, and Phillip, which was New York-based. I don't think that they are still active. A picture of my mother on a motorcycle in a barn in Millbrook. A picture of me judging her. And my mother recently told me that grasshoppers by your fireplace hearth was good luck, so I have a brass little grasshopper. And then another Egyptian moment is this. I think it actually once was a thermometer, but the parts were taken out, so it's just kind of a cool little obelisk that's got hieroglyphs and whatnot. So I chose a green grass cloth for the walls. And I think initially it started with, I had always wanted a, at the time, pea green velvet sofa. And inevitably, or eventually, I think that sort of evolved into, olive green walls, olive green velvet sofa. And I really thought that it felt cozy and inviting, almost sort of like a study or a library might, but still, captures the light and there's a good reflection off of the grass cloth and it gives you a good texture. I'm a big fan of wallpaper. I rarely ever have just a painted wall in a project. So I'm a big proponent of when in doubt, wallpaper it. And the grass cloth is great because it gives you the opportunity to do something and bring color in, but also not such a pattern commitment as I do have in other rooms of my apartment. So this is a vintage sort of pretzel rattan stool that I reupholstered in a Muro Brandolini fabric that has since been discontinued on this chartreuse ground, but it has got these really pretty butterflies on it, which I also used on a lampshade over there. But I love a butterfly on a fabric. I don't know why, but there's something very playful about them, and it gives you the opportunity for pattern, but it's just kind of a fun little moment to have on this, rattan stool. And then this is a piece that I got at auction through Camelot in Philadelphia. And I knew that I wanted a TV. I love television. I love TV, but I didn't really want it to be mounted on the wall. And I wasn't really going to go through the exercise of doing a proper built-in. So I knew I needed something that could hold books and act as a bookcase while still sort of concealing the TV and giving it a moment to get off a wall or off a flat surface like a console or something like that. And it's great. I mean, it's a perfect piece because it gives you sort of display moments, but also gives me book storage, and I can kind of display all my trinkets and collections and things, which I love. And up here is actually a really fun malachite faux painted box that I got at a designer yard sale in Millbrook from Thomas Preston, who's a wonderful designer and antiques dealer who has the best stuff. This floor lamp is from him, and then I've got one other thing from him behind me. But some mushrooms, snails, and then this is a bust of my great-grandfather, who unfortunately for him, he got a little bit of a broken nose while in transit from North Carolina. So unfortunate, but it's kind of fun, and there's a little bit of a story there, which I think is kind of, fun to tell at a parties, because people always ask what happened to him. And then this is the, floor lamp from Thomas Preston. It's kind of a fun, modern, mid-century, Italian or French maybe, floor lamp. But it's nice to sort of not, I always love a lampshade, because it gives you another opportunity for a fabric and a pattern. But I think this is kind of nice because it also emits a nice, really soft glow. And this chair was something I had at my old apartment. It was a pair, and they were a gift for my birthday from my mother. And I reupholstered this one. And this was sort of beyond the green velvet sofa, green grass cloth walls. This was sort of the decorating route, because you can kind of pull so many colors from a floral, because you've got brown, you've got olive green, you've got, peacocky Prussian blue, light blue, lavender. It is sort of where you're able to pull all the different colors and sort of make a fun scheme that, makes it all make sense and be cohesive. This is actually a stool that I recently got from Creel & Gow in Millbrook. It's a, gold painted tree stump, which I think is kind of fun. So you've got the gold moment, but it's also sort of, natural and rustic in that it's a tree stump. And the series here is actually one of the first things that I bought for this apartment beyond, decorating sort of fabric, wallpaper, things like that. It is a series of Zodiac prints by Salvador Dali. And it's a second issue of this series that I think came out in 1969. And the first series was in 1967, and they were probably about double the size. I found it on Cherish, believe it or not, and I had it saved, and I knew, that I wanted it, but didn't really have a place for it, or, did not have an end location for them, and was lucky that it was still available. And I've only ever seen one other set of these prints, which I think is kind of interesting. But I like that I truthfully was not aware of this, but he's most known for sort of the, melting clocks and the stairs and sort of the more stereotypical Dali, but I did not know he, painted this, which I find to be, very interesting. There's a lot of color, and he had sort of fun interpretations of some of these zodiacs. Like, for instance, I think the crab is actually a lobster, so that's kind of a different, Dali take on it, which I think is kind of interesting. And the sofa I bought from CB2, and I had reupholstered, and I kind of like doing things like that. Sometimes when, the budget doesn't allow for, a custom piece of furniture, there are ways around it. So I bought the sofa from CB2, had it reupholstered, and had new, back cushions made to kind of make it feel a little bit more custom. And the nice part about this is that because it's a 1-bedroom apartment, this can serve as a, guest bed for, people who spend the night when you need it. So it's kind of a fun sofa, and it's very deep and very comfortable, so it's easy to sink in and not get out. This is a coffee table that was a gift from my old boss friend, Ashley Whitaker. It's a tortoise lacquered coffee table, and the size is really great because sometimes if I'm having people over for dinner and I don't want to deal with pulling out my dining table and kind of rearranging all of that, you can easily sit, 6 people around this, and it's kind of, a little bit more casual and fun. And I've got, another camel, some Chris Spitzmiller candlesticks. I love a very crazy, weird orchid. There's a great florist around the corner called Eros who's got, the chicest flowers, orchids, things like that. So he's always kind of got a very dramatic moment for me, which I really love. And then, just some fun, a matchbox, some malachite, a lighter case from my friend Julia, a marble ashtray, and just some various books, magazines. I'm a big believer in print, so I love to read magazines. I still rip out pages and make tear sheets and keep them all, so I'm very old school in that way. And this is a fun Danish armchair that I reupholstered in a Schumacher fabric, and I really like, the expected thing would be to kind of put it in a boucle or a solid fabric, but I love to, upholster sort of a more modern or, not traditional piece in a fabric that is a little bit more unexpected, which I kind of find to be fun and exciting, and just mix it up a little bit. I've never been a fan of sort of, only neutral interiors, and I think that neutral interiors can be very chic and very interesting, but it's about making them sort of a combination of materials and fabrics and textures and things like that, as opposed to sort of the, big box neutral trend, which I think was sort of very prominent in, grays, and sort of appealing to a lot of, different people who might not know what their interests are. This is a portrait of my aunt who I've mentioned, and it's kind of a little bit ridiculous because this is her debutante oil portrait. So they did not have cameras back in I would say probably 62. So they, had their portraits done, which is kind of bougie and fabulous and absurd, and that's what I kind of like about it. And I also like that she looks a little bit pissed to be there. So I kind of, you've got a portrait which is, has a certain vibe, but I like that it's got a, she's off-put and she's uncomfortable and she's mad, and I love that about it because she was not exactly like that. And then this is where I've got my dining table, which is, an English sort of style dining table that has leaves and it folds out. So I've got dining chairs scattered around the apartment, but it mostly serves as a bar and a place for a lamp, and kind of just another way to display, collections of things. And this camel is from Thomas Preston, and it is a pair of camels that I believe are, Italian 19th century Grand Tour camels. He told me they came from a collector in LA, but my dad has one and I have the other, so it's kind of fun. So he's got the, the dad camel, I've got the baby camel. And, again, more of the butterfly fabric, which I love, and, a knockoff of a Giacometti style lamp. And then here we've got one of my dining chairs. There's a couple others spread out in my bedroom, but they were Queen Anne style chairs from my grandmother that I had, you know, chippy whited, and they're from the 40s, back when sort of reproductions were quality. And, you know, picked a fun aubergine leather, which I think sort of brightens it up and makes it a little bit more fun and youthful. I am from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and was raised by parents who were into architecture and decorating and antiques. So I had a sort of upbringing inadvertently around all that sort of stuff. And my aunt, who is sort of, you know, if you've ever seen the movie Auntie Mame, she's Mame, I'm Patrick. And she was a decorator and, you know, did all the homes I grew up in. So I was raised, you know, in that environment, and eventually I went to College of Charleston and studied historic preservation, and have always loved old buildings, architecture, historic houses, and so on and so forth. And eventually made my way to New York and worked for Ashley Whitaker for 8 years, who, you know, similarly loves, you know, classical architecture, neoclassicism, color, pattern. And for the last year, I've had my own design firm in New York. I'm gonna show you my kitchen that I got renovated before I moved in. So this was a, you know, very small kitchen for a woman who lived here and did not cook before I owned the apartment. And it, you know, had a tiny, tiny stove, tiny, tiny sink, didn't have a dishwasher. It was all, you know, it was a hot mess. And I ripped everything out and kind of started over from new, but kept the appliances in the same place so as not to have to relocate the gas lines and the water lines and things like that. And the thing you probably noticed first is the pattern on the walls in Roman shade, which is from, it's an old Alan Campbell pattern that is from Quadrille. So when I worked for a Quadrille many years ago, I'd always been obsessed with this pattern and, you know, had envisioned it being covered in a, you know, covering a pool house, walls, curtains, sofas, all the, you know, the whole 9 yards. So this is my pool house, but my kitchen in New York. And I really thought it was an opportunity to go for it. And the ceilings are very, you know, weird in here. There's a bunch of soffits that kind of go different directions. And because there's no crown, you know, when there is no crown, I always like to continue the wallpaper, but there wasn't a logical place to stop, and it almost made you kind of have to keep going. And it turned out really fun. I mean, it's a little zoomy, but it's, you know, I think it's fun, and it's sort of a little bit of a departure from the rest of my apartment, but sort of in keeping in that it's, you know, patterned and a little bold, and, you know, it's fun. I love it in here. And then I did the same fabric on the Roman shade, which is only lined, which kind of lets in a little bit of the light, which is nice. These are really fun. I recently started collecting onion bulb vases. I found one at a thrift store and thought it was just sort of weird and, you know, ugly, but also kind of cool. They're kind of a fun way to, you know, do a bud vase, which is kind of fun. And I've got, you know, daffodils in there. And then I just have some kind of, you know, art. I bought this at Stair Gallery recently. That's actually from a magazine that I ripped out, and I bought that online. And this is another Dali print that is from, like, I think it's from a book that he did, but it's the Lorelei. And again, he's got butterflies, and, you know, it's sort of a little bit less surrealist than sort of what you think of when you think of Dali in terms of, you know, melting clocks and stairs and, you know, that sort of stuff. But another sort of modern, you know, piece of art, which I like given the black and white wallpaper and, you know, Roman shade fabric. It's kind of fun to keep the modern going, but with color, which, you know, you also get from this bowl, which I got from March in San Francisco, and then this ice bucket, which is Fratelli Franciulli, which is an Italian ceramic company, probably from the 70s. I didn't want a, you know, traditional Upper East Side kitchen, you know, obviously you can see the wallpaper, but so I did glossy lacquered millwork cabinets, which in hindsight are, you know, a little bit hard to keep clean, especially in a small kitchen in New York. But I thought it was sort of a nice juxtaposition to the, you know, more traditional apartment, and kind of have more modern black oil rub bronze pulls. Last but not least, let's go to my bedroom. So we're in my bedroom, which is sort of like my kitchen, mostly black and white. And the wallpaper was one of the early decisions. It is a sort of a trompe l'oeil brick set style masonry wallpaper from Casablanca. And I like that it gives architectural interest. It gives, sort of a building block to work off of while not being colorful and, still somewhat neutral. So it gave me the opportunity to, use some other colors and not have a, overly powerful bedroom, but kind of keeping it a little bit, somewhat serene. I don't know if everybody would call this serene, but it's calm to me. Leopard carpet from Stark. So this is the old school Folsom from Stark, which I love. And it really, honestly, it is a neutral to me. I love leopard, and I think it's a great carpet to use, and it feels very Upper East Side to me. And here we have a dresser from, I think it's actually from Crate and Barrel, but I took the knobs off and replaced them with brass ones, which I think is a fun way to, take a catalog piece or something that is readily available and not that expensive and kind of change it for you and kind of, make it a little bit more yours, but also at the same time upgrade a little bit. These are 2 snake prints I got from KRB, which are actually Ophiology prints, and I bought those a long time ago, probably about 5 years ago, and I'm a big fan of, if there's something you like and you maybe don't have a home for it, but you love it, get it. You'll find something to do with it later and you'll have a home for it and you'll be able to use it and you'll always regret not having bought it. And then these are mushroom prints, or I think mycology is the technical term, but I love, mushrooms, snails, snakes. I kind of find them to be, a little bit weird, but also sort of interesting because they have fun colors, fun shapes, a little bit of pattern to them. And a Christopher Spitzmiller lamp. No home is complete without one. And a mirror I actually found in Florida, which is kind of, it's a starburst mirror and it's just as pretty. And I liked it and it kind of felt, at home here with this mirror that is from maybe CB2. But it's a nice, the juxtaposition of the two together, I think, is kind of fun. And, got some more boxes, lapis lazuli and some books. And this actually was my aunt's crystal ball. So when she, passed, I brought it home with me. I think, she used to put it out when the moon was full. This is a fun leopard head that I bought at auction from Stair. I think it actually came from the home of Pat Altschul, decorated by Mario Buada, but it's kind of just, I don't know, it's fun, and I love leopards, and it just felt like something I needed. So you might notice I have a few pairs of Vans. So I'm a true Van addict. I probably have, I think, 60 pairs of Vans in every color. Embarrassingly, this is not all of them. There are more in my storage box downstairs, but I don't know, they're fun, and it's, I wear Belgian loafers and Vans, so I opted to have the volume be occupied by the less expensive option. I have got a dresser over here no, it's not by anybody, but it was from my grandmother, my mom's mother, and it came from her house in Tennessee. And these are, my bedside table lamps are, Michael Taylor style plaster spiral lamps, and I did a lavender cotton scent shade on them, so it's a fun sort of match myself, but I love lavender, and it's kind of a fun, color to, bring in here from my living room. And then the headboard Luther Quintana made, and I think I saw a picture of a guest bedroom or a boy's bedroom by Brian McCarthy in Southampton that had sort of a pediment style headboard, and I held on to that tear sheet for years. So when it came time to, get a bed headboard for myself, I imagined one for myself inspired by that, which is kind of, it's fun. It feels also classical, sort of, temple form, but then with the, the wallpaper, it sort of carries the neoclassical vibes through into my bedroom, and I did a bed skirt because I needed the storage. And you know, most people, you know, poo-poo a bed skirt, but if you make it really tailored and keep it really neat and clean, it's a great, you know, way to be able to store stuff under your bed. And I have a lot of clothes, so you always are, you know, needing to access that sort of stuff. I've got a desk over here from Camelot, which is an auction house in Philadelphia, sort of a Janssen style 1940s desk. And the room was a little bit, the wall where the headboard goes is like a little bit too big for bedside tables. I already had this dresser that I knew I needed to use, one from storage and two because, you know, it came from my grandmother. So it's a nice way to, you know, have it be a little bit less, you know, bedside table, and, you know, mix up the arrangement, but gives me a place to do a little bit of work and, you know, I'll fill in the scale of the room proportionally a little bit better with, you know, the dresser on the other side of the room. This is a piece of art that I inherited from my aunt. It is an artist, Lincoln Seligman, and it came from Gerald Bland Gallery, who is a, you know, very, very well-known antique dealer on 59th Street. And I like that it sort of doesn't really have much to do with, you know, the colors in my bedroom, which for art, I'm not a big fan of, you know, does the artwork go with, you know, the color story or the scheme? I think the art's the art, and if you love it, put it in the room, and it doesn't need to match or correspond. If it does, great, coincidence. But I just kind of love that, you know, it's got orange. I don't have any orange in my apartment, and I actually tend not to decorate with any orange. These are prints from Jim Thompson. My grandmother traveled throughout Asia, and she brought those back, and I think that my mom had them, and I think when I moved to New York, they were just, you know, available to me for something to go on the wall. But, you know, it's funny, when I brought them to Los Angeles, I had no idea who Jim Thompson was. And then now, interestingly, you know, Jim Thompson was you know, he's a fabrics, you know, man and has a showroom now, but it just isn't, it's sort of, you know, serendipity, I guess. And then this is just a fun piece that I got in Miami, just, you know, the antithesis of what I was just saying about art not matching a scheme. This does just that. But I thought it was fun. It's a great scale. You know, it wasn't too expensive. And, you know, at the time when I didn't have a lot of other art, it was a great, you know, occupier of a wall and brought in some color. Home to me means comfort, surrounded by the things you love, the things you cherish, the things you collect, you know, and that could be anything. But I think that home really is about, you know, being the most comfortable in your space and in your environment.
Thanks for watching. Go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content and shopping guides.